And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection. I'm your host, Robert Pictou. The story of the Alaska Marine Highway System starts with three men who had a dream to provide dependable marine transportation between Alaska's coastal communities. That dream expanded to become the only marine route recognized as a National Scenic Byway and an All-American Road. The system currently extends across 35,000 miles of scenic coastline and provides service to over 30 communities, each with their own unique intrinsic qualities. On today's Open Connection, we open our archives to bring you this story from 1991.
Early morning lineups at the Alaska Ferry Terminal in Prince Rupert. Ferry travel, a romantic notion for some. For others, a necessity, the only way to reach remote communities throughout the North Coast region. Prince Rupert is the only Canadian link in the Alaska Marine Highway System. A system that carries over 400,000 passengers a year from Bellingham up the Inside Passage to Prince Rupert and onto a chain of isolated destinations on the Alaska Panhandle, like Ketchikan, Sitka, Juneau, and Skagway. Last year, 70,000 passengers traveled through Prince Rupert and the BC interior on their way to or from the States. To BC businesses, this service represents about $15 million in tourist revenues. For these people, most of them from Alaska, it's a service they've come to depend on.
About the only way to get to Ketchikan with a vehicle, unless you come out of Bellingham, lots of times they're full.
It's already hard for us living in Alaska on Prince of Wales and having to rely on the ferry to get off of there or else fly on a little seaplane, which you can't hardly afford anymore either.
We run a fishing resort in Petersburg and we get a lot of customers that come out of here.
But the waits are long and the facility is too small to meet the demands of the heavy traffic.
Yeah, you have to have reservations here long in advance in order to get out, so that tells you there's a lot of people that use it, so I would think that it should be bigger. You know, I would think the people of Prince Rupert would probably like to have this terminal stay here, I would think.
For the past 29 years, the city of Prince Rupert has taken pride in calling itself the gateway to Alaska, and it's because of this ferry terminal. But perhaps not for much longer. Here's the problem. The terminal is old and obsolete. No one recognizes that more than the man who's managed the terminal for the past 23 years.
The main problem is the age of the facility and the fact that the marine highway and the traffic has literally outgrown the current buildings, and they're no longer adequate for summer sailings. Both Customs and Immigration have indicated that they're not happy with what they have, and they really have to have a better facility to do their jobs correctly.
Alaska officials want to upgrade the Prince Rupert terminal, but they can't because they don't own the land. They lease it from the federal government, who so far have refused to cooperate on improvements.
But it's 29 years old and it's starting to show its age.
The Alaska Marine Highway people are losing patience, and they want the federal government to transfer the land over to the city of Prince Rupert. They feel the local government would be more cooperative. That's where Prince Rupert's manager of economic development comes in.
It would certainly be advantageous to Canada to turn that land over for a nominal fee to the city of Prince Rupert. I don't believe that the lease payments that are being collected at this point add up to the amount of GST that they would collect from the tourism traffic that comes through the province of British Columbia heading to Alaska.
Pucci has a copy of a letter in which the Alaska Marine Highway System puts Transport Canada on notice that unless the situation improves before December 1st of this year, when the lease expires, they'd be forced to move their traffic through Bellingham instead. The Bellingham facility is a marked contrast to what greets travelers in Prince Rupert. It's brand new, a modern and efficient people mover. If the Alaska officials were to follow through on their threat, the ferries would head north from Bellingham, bypass Prince Rupert and British Columbia altogether, and continue on to the Alaska Panhandle.
They would avoid British Columbia, which would really have a devastating impact on not only the economy of Prince Rupert, but the region and the province as a whole.
This rooming house operator says 50% of her business comes from Alaska Ferry passengers.
Well, I think it would be devastating. The fishing industry isn't what it used to be. They threaten our pulp mill to close it down, and we lose the Alaska Ferry and tourism. Prince Rupert's going to be in a bad situation.
Alaska Marine Highway is critical to the operation of our hotel. As a matter of fact, 30 years ago, the reason our hotel was built was the inauguration of the Alaska Marine Highway. It's important for two reasons. One, because it's a gateway to Alaska, and secondly, because it's an extension of the inside passage that is served by BC ferries.
The BC Ferry terminal sits next to the Alaska terminal in Prince Rupert, a logistical convenience that provincial politicians view as exploitable, not expendable.
It's my view that the tourism potential on the coast of BC has not been realized. Our vessel, Queen of the North, in the summertime is fully booked a year in advance. You can't get on it. I think that there's room for tremendous growth that ties in with the Alaska Marine Highway system, and so some pretty obvious reasons why the province would want to maintain the Prince Rupert terminal.
Recognizing the potential impact on the economy of Prince Rupert and tourism in BC, a tour de force was organized. A delegation representing the city, the Port Corporation, and the province flew north to Alaska. At this point, the federal government will only say it's looking at the problem. Well, that's not good enough for the delegates, so they've chosen to deal directly with the decision makers in the state capital, Juneau. So when a gathering of state senators hosted a neighborly luncheon for the delegation, Prince Rupert's mayor wasted no time in expressing his dissatisfaction with Transport Canada.
We don't believe that our federal government has done the proper job, recognizes the importance both to the country and to the state of that particular facility. So the city of Prince Rupert is going to take over the project. We're going to build a facility for you to be proud of.
Although there's been no agreement with Ottawa, the mayor carried that optimistic promise to the state legislature.
In order to make sure that the ferry system is completely satisfied, is we're going to take over the project from the federal government. We're going to construct a new facility.
I hope you will find the legislature open to your interests on suggestions for terminal or infrastructure improvements.
Despite the goodwill between Alaska and the BC delegation, the threat of a pullout from Prince Rupert is still very real.
I think Prince Rupert needs us, and British Columbia needs us. The big problem is the absentee landlord situation. It's very difficult, impossible to get anything done with the bureaucracy, the Canadian bureaucracy, etc. If we can't come to grips with making improvements there, Prince Rupert is out and Bellingham is in, and I'm not sure that's what we really want, but that is the bottom line, it seems like.
Back in Prince Rupert, the terminal faces an uncertain future. It's now up to the federal government to decide whether to transfer the lease for the land over to the city.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. Due to the huge numbers of Portuguese speakers around the world, it's the 6th most spoken language on the planet, and its distribution across South America, Europe, Africa, and Asia, Portuguese is growing fast and has the potential to become an international communication language. Let us return to the archives to discover more about the people of Portugal.
The majority of the Kitimat Portuguese community comes not from mainland Portugal, but from the Azores, a group of islands in the Atlantic off Portugal's coast, the most westerly of which is closer to Newfoundland than Portugal. In the early 50s, Canada allowed 5,000 immigrants from Portugal, and 1,600 of those came from the Azores. One long-time resident didn't arrive in Kitimat right away.
No, I had a contract for CN for a year, and I worked for CN for 11 months, and for the other months was in Ontario, in a sawmill in Amigos, it's 80 kilometers west of Sudbury.
And what made you decide to come to Kitimat?
Well, it's another mystery. Yeah. 3 of us working at sawmill, and one friend of us was in Kitimat. And we used to write to each other, and he said, why don't you come up to Kitimat? I said, what is that? Well, it's in British Columbia, and I make $1.65 an hour. And I told you, I said, well, let's pick it up and go.
$1.65 an hour in the mid-50s was a lot of money.
We were making $1.15 then.
I see.
At Sawmill. So it was a big difference. And we packed it up and we moved to Kitimat.
When he did come in 1955, there were about 200 of his countrymen in Kitimat, but he didn't get the Alcan job he was looking for at first. There were 600 people with the same idea, and on the way to catch the train to Vancouver to continue the job search, he found another opportunity.
I was walking from the campsite down to River Lodge,
yes,
up to come to the city center to take a train to Vancouver. And we look up above, it was a sawmill there. And I told my friends, well, gee, let's look up there and see what is the job for us. So we went up and we finally got a job there.
At the sawmill first?
Yes. We worked there from 55 until 57 when the sawmill shut down.
So that was the sawmill making lumber for the homes and so on?
Yes, for the construction, for the cement construction. All the construction in Kitimat, the lumber was cut in the sawmill.
When shown a picture of a friend's cousin, he decided he wanted to get to know her better.
It was by letter, and we courted for about a year and a half, and I got married in 57.
But you didn't go back to Portugal?
No, I got married by Prague. I was too cheap to go down there. not too cheap, but I guess those days the money was not the best thing to get.
So there was a full-scale wedding in Portugal with someone standing in for you?
Yes, her father was standing for me. And I had an arrangement with the Catholic Church in Kitimat. I had a special mass for myself. And on the evening, I drank with the friends and have a few drinks there and there.
So your wife arrived in Kitimat?
My wife arrived in Kitimat in March the 13th, 1958. We've been living here ever since. 2 kids, Tony and Susie. They're all growing up.
Yeah. And it's obviously worked out very well?
Oh, beautiful. Can't complain. Can't complain. If everybody should get married the way I did, probably things work better.
Though many immigrants believe they would just spend a few years, make some money, and go back home, very few ever did. Louis De Silva came to Kitimat in the 50s, before moving to Toronto for a few years to play professional soccer and work as an immigration consultant.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. Portugal was at the forefront of European exploration in the 15th and 16th centuries. During the Age of Discovery, Ferdinand Magellan became the first person to circumnavigate the globe. Vasco da Gama discovered a sea route to India, and Bartholomew Diaz was the first to sail around the southern tip of Africa. He called this the Cape of Good Hope. Let us return to the archives as one Kitimat resident recalls what they knew about Canada in 1953.
The idea that started in 1953 was like Canada was a country that has all kinds of lumber, but we believed that the Dora bills were hanging up on the tree. And all that came in was 60 immigrants came in 1953 from an island between our island and the Azores and the mainland called Madeira. And then immediately it was some from the Azores. When these people come over here out of pure sheer necessity. It was hard to maintain a family with 5, 6, families with 10, 12, 14 kids. And that was the opportunity of immigrating over here and making some money. So the basic idea was to make some money, that now they could go back and rent a little space, a little bit of land, that they could sort of grow some vegetables to help with the necessities of the family. Nobody realized then that working that hard, that amount that they could save would be much more than they've ever dreamed. Now they were able to support their families back home while they were here working to a level that they could never dream before. So as that amount increased, they figured, well, the dream could be a lot larger, I get a little bit of land, maybe I can get some money for the house. And then when they established that, then they figured, well, if I do all this, why should I go back? Why don't I bring the family over? And you know, as soon as
Brothers, sisters, cousins followed in a steady stream. Though the mainland Portuguese went mostly to Europe, emigrants from the Azores came mostly to Canada and the US.
If all the people from the Azores will return today, we'll sink the islands. I don't know kind of production lines they must have
It's like
there.
the Scots. If all the Scots
Yes.
went back to Scotland,
Yes.
the place would be
Oh,
overpopulated.
sure. No space for it. It's incredible.
Yes.
But the great majority, to be more specific on your answer, of the immigrant are from the Azores.
Okay.
The exhibit, sponsored by the Portuguese consulate, traveled across the province. There was some very fine filigree work shown off in these miniature boxes, extremely difficult to make out of gold and silver, and which show a real Moorish influence. Most people familiar with the culture will recognize the cock, the symbol of good luck from an ancient legend.
An innocent man was going to be hanged for a crime he had not committed, but he could not prove this. And in desperation, I guess, he prayed to the Virgin of St. James, and St. James is one of the big patrons in this area. And I think obviously, St. James, knowing that he was innocent, was going to do something about it. He had to visit the magistrate, the judge, one day at his home. And while there, the magistrate was having dinner, and he was prepared to eat a roasted cock. So the poor innocent man said, look, I am innocent, and if I am, this cock is going to crow. And lo and behold, the cock did. So of course he was saved. And from them we have this cock in the households just for protection.
Cork, for which Portugal is famous, is used extensively. And there's obviously a real love of using bright decoration. No exhibit would be complete without a display of weaving.
Well, this bedspread comes from Alto Alentejo, and we have seen the colorful work of the painted wood objects, and here we see also a lot of colors. It's a bedspread, but it's also a blanket. So it performs two functions. This is a blanket to keep people warm while they are sleeping, and it's colorful because it's also a bedspread for daily use. And it's made of merino wool. Now, in this area, the merino wool is quite well known and is used widely in blankets. And that, of course, is very appropriate for blankets because that type of wool is warm but light, so it makes very comfortable blankets. Another use for these blankets is they are used by shepherds to keep themselves warm. And also, they can be used to put on top of donkeys or horses. So it's very widespread, and they are very beautiful.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Linen is a type of textile made from the fibers of a flax plant. Linen textiles are one of the oldest textiles in the world. They are cool to touch, smooth, and get softer with repeated washing. The fibers do not stretch, but because of this very low elasticity, the fabric will eventually break if it is folded and ironed at the same place consistently. In this final segment of Open Connection, we look back at some linens at the Kitimat Museum.
The quality of the linens was remarkable, and it was the tradition for every young woman to make the linen needed for her own household.
They were made by the girls in preparation for marriage. Generally or traditionally, when a girl reached puberty, she will start working on her dowry. And she will have to make all her linen. That means the towels, as we can see here, tablecloths, sheets, anything that is needed for a new household. Of course, the girl will have been prepared beforehand by the mother and grandmother. And she will have been very adept by that time in embroidery, weaving, perhaps also lace making.
The embroidery, cutwork, lace, and crochet shown were exquisite.
These are made of bobbin lace, but then we also have crochet lace right there.
This is incredible quality.
It's exquisite. It's so fine. I am amazed at the quality of that work.
And this is very traditional. Again, we've seen this at the multicultural exhibition in the Portuguese booth. This metallic paper work.
Yeah, and it's purely decorative. So it's very joyful, and it doesn't have any other function but to decorate.
And it has a little... Fishermen from the Azores often went whaling, and on show were these whalebone carvings made by a Kitimat resident, Manuel Alves. The dolls shown here were dressed in traditional clothes for display on Kitimat's community float, which has a multicultural theme. The Portuguese have a great seafaring tradition and have settled all over the world, but the great waves of emigration only started in the last century.
Well, it started in the mid-19th century, and the first wave went to Brazil. The reason being that when the slavery in Brazil was banned, they substituted the labor with immigrants. What happened with them is that they literally came into the same conditions as the slaves. Now, these people came from Portugal, and they didn't have money to pay their trip there. So the landowners of Brazil will pay for this trip and will deduct it from the wages. The wages were minimum. The conditions were pretty bad.
So they were bound to those employers until they had paid off what was owed for bringing to Brazil and so on.
Exactly, yes. And the first wave came mainly from the Mino region, which is represented with the costumes here.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, there was also emigration to Hawaii, which seems,
yes,
I didn't think of emigrating to Hawaii.
No, we haven't heard of that as much, but they went to Hawaii too. And later on, they came to North America and in other parts. The immigration to Hawaii happened towards the end of the 19th century. And then another big wave came with the war wars, the first one and especially the second one, because conditions, of course, again were bad, and therefore many people had to leave. There are other factors for these immigration waves. In the 19th century, many people lost their lands because of the changes in society with the implementation of industry. So there were many people who lost lands who were bourgeois. Also, with industry, many artisans were displaced, so therefore they needed jobs, and the only solution was to emigrate.
Census data shows more than 20 different language groups in Kitimat, with Portuguese being the most predominant after English. The immigrants have made their mark in their new home.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind to his heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.